welcome to Long Story Short. I'm Keyshawn Haynes. Happy Shouter Baptist Liberation Day. It is a holiday, so we're going a little bit easier than normal, but we still have a lot to talk about. So I'm going to start today with a confession. I have been trolling the Minister of National Security from the comfort of my own home. Now, what do I mean? See, let's go back. One of the major driving forces of the Venezuelan registration of 2019 was to count exactly how many Venezuelans there were in the country at the time. Now remember, there were so many numbers being bandied about. And well, this is what we settled on.
So respectfully, to the world, to the whole world, I say, as the person in charge of this process, that it was 16,523 Venezuelans registered in that 2-week process. Not 40,000, not the 100,000 that Senator Mark just declared to the world.
Right. So that's how many there were in the country at that time. Legal, illegal, everything in between. And we've spoken about this before on the show, where the government was never really sure about what was going to happen at the end of that year. Remember, the original thought was that after a year, Venezuela would, right the ship and things would go back to normal.
To work here for a year in the first instance, persons, as I've said, have asked, well, what happens after that year? We are sincerely hoping that Venezuela, during the period of a year, will stabilize and that things will get better in Venezuela with the stabilization of their internal affairs, and then persons will want to move back home. If that does not happen, because I certainly don't have the ability to predict the future, we will deal with it closer to the time.
And that time came and went, the pandemic and all that, and extension after extension. So a few weeks ago, Minister Young went on I-95 with Garth and Natalie on Iron Dependency to launch the Venezuelan Re-registration. The re-registration is like a doctor's visit. You just check in, see how everything's going, and remind them you're not allowed to vote.
Emphasize is this is a re-registration. So we are not opening up the ambit. We're not opening it up for those who had not registered before in 2019.
So I had a question. How are we going to count the number of Venezuelans this time? That number of 16,523 will obviously be fewer. We know that. Venezuelans have been willingly repatriated. Maybe they were deported. Maybe they died. But we know for sure that's not the number of Venezuelans registered in the country right now. Since then, we know that there have been hundreds of Venezuelans who have come into the country illegally. And I want to stress, this is not an indictment. We're not talking immigration policy here. All we want to know is how many there are now. So, my trolling. Here was my first attempt.
Before we go to the lines, how many, now question was asked, how many the legal and illegal are here right now? Was a recount done or anything like that? Would you have any idea?
So God, what all we can say as a government is that when we conducted this exercise in 2019, we registered 16,523 persons.
See, there's that number again. That's 2019 figures, which as far as stats go in this country is pretty up to date, if we're being honest, because, CSO, where you at? But it's not what I want to know. Anyway, you were saying.
You hear all sorts of ridiculous propositions by those in opposition. I have heard them literally in one parliamentary sitting go from 20,000 to 40,000 to 100,000, etc. I saw the most ridiculous proposition, but not surprising, by the opposition the other day that Young must verify that there are not 100,000 Venezuelans here.
And yes, we know this dance, as expected. Blame the opposition. But I am not saying, tell me there's not 100,000. What I want you to do is find a way to tell me how many there are. Are there more or fewer than 16,523?
Obviously, we recognize, because our heads aren't buried in the sand, that there are going to be more than 16,500 Venezuelans here. We have picked up illegal Venezuelans.
Well, self-awareness is key. It's important that at least you know that you're lacking. Okay, so there was a second attempt, and this was when he officially launched the program at the Minister of National Security a few days later.
What is being done to get an accurate count on how many Venezuelans there are in TNT, both and illegal?
All right, so as you rightly recall, this was an opportunity to get an accurate number of the amount of Venezuelans. We said whether you're here legally or illegally, come and register. If you don't, you're subject to our laws and you can be deported immediately thereafter. So we, the government, think that is an accurate figure, fairly accurate figure for that point in time. At the time, unfortunately, a couple of years before, you had the UN suggesting 40,000.
Oh God, this again. Yes, he goes on to talk about the opposition, yada, yada, yada. Fast forward.
There would have been more who came in via visa thereafter, who have permission, some come in via work permits. Those are the legal routes. It is difficult to provide a figure as to how many are here illegally until they meet the system. So until they're picked up, until they come in to try and regularize, etc. I do know it will be over 16,000 by definition, by logic.
Well, at least he's consistent. It's funny, he's always so upset with people who attribute really high numbers of Venezuelans in here, but he himself says that he's pretty sure it's more than 16,000. But I don't want to be guessing, and that's my point. So I thought, one more time, who else could I get to ask Stuart Young this question at a time when I know he has to answer?
Is the minister going beyond the 16,000 that were previously registered in order to find the accurate number of Venezuelans in Trinidad?
Yeah, I know. It surprised me too. Okay, so what did he say this time?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, there are a number of ways that the government derives information with respect to migrants, not only Venezuelan migrants. That information is derived in addition for the Venezuelans, in addition to the re-registration exercise from our immigration officers and from the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service and the Defense Force when they come across Venezuelans who may not be properly registered and legally here in Trinidad. In addition to that, immigration would have the necessary records of Venezuelans outside of the re-registration and the registration exercise who have been granted permission to be here, for example, via the provision of visas.
So let's recap. We're starting at a number, 16,523 legal Venezuelans. But let's add an unknown number of illegal Venezuelans, subtract only the illegal Venezuelans who you've actually caught, and then add those who are here on a visa for a few months because that's how long it lasts. I mean, it's a foolproof plan to truly get an accurate number. No, it's not. You cannot solve for X.
Thankful is the minister confirming that he does not know the number of Venezuelans resident in Trinidad and Tobago.
I will not entertain that question, member.
Managers are innocent.
Aye, language. But yes, and stick a pin in this because this is history, ladies and gentlemen. I agree with Rodney Charles. Rodney Charles is right. It's basically that we do not have a way to know how many Venezuelans are in the country right now. And the government has painted themselves into a corner yet again because you can't actually count the illegal Venezuelans because then you'd have to, deport them. You can't just catch and release. It's not fishing. So we resort again to people who are actually dedicating their time to this, who the government actually is kind of at odds with sometimes. The UNHCR says around 19,490 refugees and asylum seekers are currently registered with them. Now, they don't say how many of those specifically are Venezuelans, but they do say that 86% of UNHCR's persons of concern are Venezuelan. Pretty soon, when the vaccines start rolling out, remember, they're eligible too. We have to make sure that there's enough for everyone. And that's what counts. Let's take a break.